Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, April 10th, 2026, going up on a Saturday, and alas, also filmed on a Saturday. I'm sad or disappointed that I am continuing so far this Saturday filming tradition into April. But the big reason I'm filming on a Saturday today is I wanted to, do my first AM reading video of April and at least have one completed book to talk about. So huzzah! I finished one late last night. Also, I'm filming at a time on Saturday because I want to film and post and then get on with my day. And usually the sun does weird things on my face, although right now I'm looking pretty normal. It might have something to do with the weather outside. But let's not tempt fate. I just have a short, sweet video, I think, to talk about here. As always with AM reading videos, I'm going to start by reviewing a short story in a literary journal. And I am currently reading from Ploughshares, and this is the Spring 2025 edition. I read a story this week called The Color of the Sun by Mark Spragg, and ostensibly it is a story about an elderly woman who takes a bad fall. But the way she describes herself is basically as a wounded animal. She already has like an innate cynicism in this short, very short story, where she's talking about, well, at my age, these sorts of accidents and, broken bones and etc. just start to pile up. And then she talks about how, at her age, most of her friends are dead, and of those remaining, everybody else has dementia or one person has cancer. Anyway, the writing is, I think, very deliberately hyper-specific, very focused on specific physical language in order to detract from any sort of emotional melodrama. I really do feel like that is Spragg's intention for writing this and getting into the head of an elderly woman. And as she's on the asphalt after this fall, she's thinking back way into the past when she was a young girl, and her mare, her prized mare, also suffered a broken leg, and she herself had to put the mare down. And so there's an obvious parallel between the mare who was injured at the end of her life and this old woman injured, and she's thinking, this means I'm at the end of my life. I can't help but think about how it's a little dehumanizing in a way. In fact, I think this same parallel just came up. I just watched the first couple episodes of The Testaments, the Handmaid's Tales sequel show. And at one point, a wife is watching a Martha, which is like the dystopian world's name for a maid, limp off with a leg injury. And she said, we raised horses when I was a little girl, and when a mare, had an injured leg, we'd put her down. So obviously meant to be dehumanizing. I don't know. I think I'm being I'm saying that maybe bringing that a little too far into this to be critical of how this writer is handling the situation. I mean, I do feel like as a writing exercise, to be able to describe the physical reality and the whole idea of relating it to the sun is as the elderly woman is, looking up from her injured position, and people are starting to gather and call an ambulance, but mostly she's looking at and thinking about the sun and describing it in vivid colors. And at one point she says it might have a circle inside of it, the color of mare's blood, and so obviously that's meant to harken back to her, earlier vignette. And I feel like it's clever, and I should, give it more accolades that, it really uses language really efficiently. And, there is something to be said about not leaning into melodrama, but I also feel like I'm, a little contrarian or defensive about, not being emotional in writing and, judging a male author for this is how he's portraying an elderly woman. But that's really probably more on me. And I think maybe the most objective thing to say is, in terms of a writing exercise, I think there really is some really good descriptive writing and an interesting way to talk about this elderly woman who obviously has had a bad fall and is near, the end of her natural life as it is. relating to the people around her in this situation and remembering this event from her past. The one book I finished this week is Lightbreakers by Aja Gabel. I listened to it on Libby. This was one of my 2025 anticipated releases, and it's also my first speculative fiction book in a while, so that's kind of exciting, though it's definitely more on the literary side of speculative fiction. I tend to read a lot of literary speculative fiction, and, I have some mixed results about it. But this one, actually, I think it worked decently well for me. And I knew Aja Gabel. I've read one of her earlier books, which was more definitively literary fiction a few years ago. So I'll link my review of The Ensemble down below, which was about her chronicling a classical quintet of musicians. But anyway, this one is definitely in the speculative sci-fi world. We're following three main characters, and two in particular, this married couple, Maya and Noah. And Maya is Noah's second wife. His first wife is Eileen, who was the third main character, or POV character. And Noah and Eileen had a really horrible tragedy in their lives where their 4-year-old daughter Serena died suddenly in the night, and they weren't able to, maintain their relationship past that, and so they ultimately divorced and are, still really haunted by it. I mean, understandably so, but it is, an emotional, impairment in a way to moving forward. I mean, they're so lost in their grief that well, actually, Noah does ultimately marry his second wife, Maya, and is taken with her, artistic sensibilities. He himself is a scientist, a physicist, and she, I think makes him feel like part of the world again to a certain degree, but he can't ever fully feel like part of the world. So his grief is always sort of a deterrent in their relationship. But they're kind of going about their lives. He's working as a physicist, and she's working at an art gallery. And, to a less dramatic degree, she's kind of, dissatisfied with her own life and wants to get back to actually being a creative again. Anyway, Noah is approached by an eccentric billionaire, as you do. This billionaire has a secret compound in the middle of Texas where they're doing scientific experiments having to do with quantum physics. And actually, in his earlier days, Noah penned a controversial thesis about how the human brain might be sort of created by quantum physics. We're, getting way out of my area of expertise. I'm a sci-fi fan who kind of coasts along with anything too hard science. But anyway, this is what catches the billionaire Klein Michael's attention, and he offers Noah a really lucrative job and, puts something insane on the table, that because of this theory, he and his team in their secret compound, using only his money, have found a way to manipulate the brain to time travel back into, so that a person can basically do a quantum leap. If there was a show the show I remember was from the 90s, and the premise is that the main character could always leap to a certain period in his lifetime. It doesn't have to be in his, direct life, but then he could, help right some wrongs, and he just quantum leaps into, So I wonder if Aja Gabel was somewhat inspired by that. But anyway, so, it's a crazy idea, obviously. It's a sci-fi idea, but Noah is kind of primed to take it because of his eccentric, beliefs as it is, or, hypothesis as it is, and also because he has this horrible thing in his past that, he would, if there's anything you'd want to fix or go back to and redo, it would be the death of his daughter Serena. So he is very taken by this. And at first, so is Maya, because they're given this huge paycheck, and so she's able to quit this job where she's unsatisfied and maybe go and try to rekindle an art career. And it turns out that Klein Michaels, unsurprisingly for billionaires, I suppose, is hyper controlling, and so he's already like found a position for her with an art gallery in town, and we can tell from the off that, you know, basically I think everybody is dependent on Klein Michaels's benefits, as you were, and that he has them under his thumb. There's this whole storyline having to do with wounded animals, and we don't know why they're dying, but everybody's kind of like hush hush about it, and that obviously has to do with keeping secrets for Klein Michaels. Meanwhile, Noah is going through an induction in the lab, and like he's going to be the guinea pig who travels back in time, and so Gabel does go through a big thing of him having to like take cocktails and sort of clear his mind and think back to the past. And in fact, Klein Michaels even developed his house to look like the house that Noah lived in when Serena was alive. So that's, you know, putting him in that mind space. He's always exhausted. He and Maya are starting to fall apart from each other, and Maya's feeling a bit neglected, and like her desires for, you know, the future, like having a child of their own, are definitely put on the back burner. And she's also getting into a retrospective sort of stage where she's remembering her past growing up in Japan and an old boyfriend and her old dreams of art. So that ultimately, when it does feel like their relationship reaches its ultimate tipping point, she does go back to Japan for a while, and Noah calls up Eileen, who is now teaching, I think, in California, and in a new relationship, sort of tentatively testing those waters out of her own grief. But, you know, she still has this connection with Noah, and Noah's saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to do time travel to go back and see Serena. And so she does go to stay with him, and she sees that this time traveling, what they call folding, is taking a toll on Noah's health, although when he offers to take her along for the ride, of course she is okay with that to a certain degree. And, you know, I'm talking about sort of the absurd premise, but really I feel like this has less to do with time travel and more to do with, I guess, a metaphorical time travel, because, you know, even when they're not folding themselves, they are going back to the past a lot in their heads. And this whole narrative is about, you know, what it's like to have regrets, and to what it's like to, you know, want to take a second path and to overanalyze, you know, what went wrong. And, you know, when it comes to relationships, I think these are so unusual in a way. We talk a lot about the beauty and strength and amazingness of parenthood, which, you know, I'm not a parent myself, but the way that she describes it, how it really deepens relationships. It just goes above and beyond how a lot of romance and a lot of, you know, sort of scrutiny into couples centers only on their relationship. But this one really does talk about parenthood as well, or the desire for parenthood. And art and science also stand in for a desire to sort of understand the world and our place in it, and to parse what meaning and beauty we can. But it's obviously, this is a novel that, you know, I don't know how much I can trust Gabel's quantum physics, because I don't have the expertise. But I do think in terms of the narrative, it definitely leans more into the metaphor or the more philosophy about science and meaning than, you know, actual practice, unless we actually can send people back in time with quantum physics, and I just don't know about it. But yeah, I did find it really moving, although it could also, you know, the fact is that Serena was such the focal point that to a certain degree it was disorienting following Maya's story, although it was also really beautiful. I did actually like her interactions with her own parents in Japan, and how that really did, you know, set Maya on her own new path about rethinking their past relationships and all of that. So it again is another variation of the theme about parents and children and revisiting the past. And then there is Klein Michaels, and, you know, he's a billionaire, so he's just, you know, naturally nefarious. He has these, you know, he has these sort of godlike, you know, delusions, and when it comes to him, you know, doing any harm to the community, he always wants to sweep it under the rug. So he's an antagonist, although his antagonism is never all that I guess, dangerous, that ultimately the protagonist can get the better of him. And I don't know how believable that part of the story is, but in general, it doesn't matter as much because the beauty of this story is in the ruminations about, you know, love and regret and life and beauty and meaning. And yeah, I really am glad I read this. Okay, so much for the sun acting normal. I'm now back into my usual Saturday morning light and shadow space. But next, I am in the middle of Happy New Year's by Maya Arad. And this is another one of my 2025 anticipated releases. This is epistolary fiction, definitely literary fiction with, you know, a specific sort of writing style. But, you know, for all of my grousing about, you know, untraditional writing styles, I think this one is relatively working for me. I enjoy it. I mean, the premise of this is that we're following this character, Leah Zimmerman, and every year she writes New Year's letters to the cohort of people she went to teaching school with in Israel. And by New Year, I mean Rosh Hashanah, which would be in the autumn time. And so we start in the 60s, and these letters are going to go on, I think, for 50 years, year by year, as she's recounting her life. And she actually moves abroad relatively quickly to teach Hebrew in America. And it's an interesting way to look at, I think, an unreliable sort of narrator, that she has some dramas with men sometimes, or she sometimes denies in one letter her feelings for somebody and then in the next admits, oh yeah, I actually did have feelings for them. And she responds to a lot of the gossip because the Israeli expat community, I guess, you know, they go home and sometimes they gossip about her, like when her husband goes into really bad financial debt or has gambling issues. And Leah also has a friend within the cohort, Mira, who she's a little closer to. So sometimes she actually gives a little more of an honest scoop to Mira. And I'm actually still at early days of this, where she's still a young mom, recently divorced. Actually, it's in the early 80s by this point. But I think this book is going to go on until the 21st century. So I'm really intrigued to see how this character might change as she grows into, you know, a grandmother and that sort of thing. And, you know, it's a challenging precept because we're learning about this character through first-person letters. And so we're talking as close first person as you can get without any sort of neutral objectivity, except for, you know, what we might read between the lines of how she's responding to things. But I don't know, this really works for me, I think, so I'll be reporting back. And the final book I'll hold up here is Baldwin, a love story, and the book is so big that the title and subtitle are going on to the spine, and this is a biography by Nicholas Boggs of the writer James Baldwin, which I imagine is going to go pretty deep in the weeds in terms of biography. And I am reading this for the BookTube Prize, so otherwise I'll zip my lips on it, except to say that the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard in 2019 as a way for the literary bookdernet to come together and judge the best of literary fiction and nonfiction published in the US in English the year before. So in 2026, we are judging 2025 releases. So we are in the second of 4 rounds. We started with long lists of 48 books, and then through 4 rounds, we whittled them down until we get to winners and runners-up per each division. So this is the quarterfinals, the second round, and I am judging nonfiction Group A. So that means I am pitting this book against 5 others on my ballot to discover which ones I want to advance to the next round, to the semifinals. And until then, I'm zipping my lips as an official judge so that I don't influence anyone else with my opinions. I did give some preliminary thoughts on my ballot in a recent video. I'll link to that down below, as well as to the website for the BookTube Prize in case you'd like more information. And that about covers it for me. I also have my March literary newsletter linked down below. I finally remembered to plug my literary newsletters in a video. Anyway, in my literary newsletters, I aggregate to summarize literary news that caught my fancy. I have snippets from all of the book reviews I read that month. I highlight a book picture and a book quote, and so check it all out down below. Otherwise, this should be a pretty reading intensive weekend for me, but not so much with my traditional book reading. I belong to a couple of writing groups and I have some submissions to read and critique from other people, so that should take up a little bit of my time. And I also should be doing some booktube filming. On that note, expect me back here on this channel in the next couple of days because I have some TBR videos to film for the month and the quarter, starting with my quarterly TBR game, the BookTube Spin. Stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.